Hello everybody, my name is Fernando, and I'm here to show you my TOK exhibition. So the prompt I selected was, what constraints are there in the pursuit of knowledge? And for this exhibition, we will examine just that. What constraints are there in the pursuit of knowledge? And we will explore different factors and perspectives in which we all try to pursue knowledge. However, those attempts are greatly halted. We will analyze what constraints are stopping us and whether or not it would have been better for them to be there in the first place. And that leads us to our first object, which is the thumbnail of a video discussing online censorship from TV and social media from a late night TV host, Stephen Colbert, which the video was founded in January 26, so many of you are familiar with this video. The pursuit of knowledge is heavily constricted due to censorship. That includes both censorship on TV and social media. And although the host jokes about this, I think it's something that should be taken seriously, as a lot of people are busy with their lives and get most of their media from the news, TV, and social media, and they do it while relaxing because it's the only time they have. Censorship will only limit our pursuit of knowledge because whenever we go online to see the news or events of what's going on, it's heavily reviewed, heavily censored media, and it stops us from knowing what the truth of what's going on. And the limits get bigger and bigger, as although it may just start off as something like nudity, trying to prevent us of seeing nudity on TV and social media, it can expand to greater things and constrain us from learning the truth for the average person. But the thing is, many of these censorships aren't without reason. A lot of censorships have a reason for their existence, and they tend to be in mind of the viewer, right? They tend to be for the viewer. That could be the case, but it could also be due to companies wanting to expand to a wider audience. Censoring a lot of things to make sure that it's perfectly suitable for everybody allows them to expand and allows the company to grow, which at the end of the day, that's what a business is. And so it's not there in order to protect us, instead for the business to grow. Censorship and curation of knowledge is extremely harmful. It has a massive impact on a person's daily life because they get most of their information, and since they're trying to censor everything in order to expand, it prevents us from learning the truth and constrains us from understanding knowledge. Although that's very important, I think there's also ethics that comes into mind, which leads us to our second object, an image taken during the Stanford experiment provided by the Stanford Library. The image above is from the Stanford experiment, which is a well-known experiment that is talked about when ethical experiments are mentioned. It was conducted in August of 1971 to test obedience, power dynamics, and the abuse of humans among other humans. The experiment had 12 prisoners and 12 officers, all of them being students. The 12 officers were sent to arrest the other 12 students and held in a basement of Stanford, made to look like a prison. These officers were allowed to do anything they wanted to the prisoners. The officers would abuse and make them do push-ups in front of everybody, humiliating these prisoners. The prisoners would try to fight back, but each time they were met with either physical and psychological abuse by the officers. An example of this would be taking away their beds or being forced to stay up. And at one point, they had bags over their heads, like the video, which is a good image of what's shown. These prisoners have bags over their heads. And after a few days of this, it caused the prisoners to go bad. One of the prisoners threatened to harm himself, while others threatened to not eat. And so after 6 days, the experiment was ended. This experiment highlights one of the massive constraints on pursuing knowledge, as although we learned a lot about humans, for example, because this was anonymous, that's one of the reasons why the officers were so gruesome with the other prisoners, because they knew they had this power and could just get away with it. So although we learned that about humans, is it really worth it? In order to attain that knowledge, we had to force 12 humans to endure abuse from their peers, and many of whom could have been damaged permanently, either physically or mentally, if the experiment had gone on for longer. Fortunately, it didn't, but it's critical to know that one of the massive constraints is ethical, but at the same time, is the well-being of people worth getting this knowledge? Are we willing to lose and hurt people permanently in order to attain this knowledge? Some would say it's worth it, but others would not. And this finally leads us to our third and final object. This is an image of me when I was 4 years old. Right? You see, when I was 4, I was, believe it or not, young. And there were many constraints on my pursuit of knowledge. You see, when I was younger, I was fortunate enough to have a tablet. But that tablet had parental locks attached, meaning many websites were restricted to me. So I resorted to learning anything I could, from watching YouTube videos about science to anything I really wanted. But that allowed me to look and consume. But those parental locks decided that some things I was not allowed to know. Some websites were restricted and some websites were allowed to me. They decided what I was allowed and not allowed to consume. And it was not only just my tablet, but when, as a child, when I would ask people questions, whether that be the classic question of where do babies come from, or any question at all, a lot of questions can either be dismayed or answered with a lie. But why do people do this? Why do parents and people restrict knowledge from children so young, despite the fact this is the time in which they should be learning and developing? Many would say it's due to the fact that children are too young to be told the truth to protect for their innocence. For example, like most children, my parents tried to sell me on the idea of Santa Claus, but I was pretty quick to realize he was not necessarily real, as I did watch my parents wrap the gifts every year. But I do believe that it's a good thing to keep a child to create this childlike sense of wonder for children, as it's wonderful to not know certain things about the cruel world that we live in, but at the same time, it's very important that these children know about the truth because eventually they will learn the truth at some point in their lives, and so why hide it for them and allow them to learn it on their own? Why not just tell them from the get go? Most things I think should be allowed for children to experience, but I think another handful of information should be decided by the parents or even have parental supervision, as I think we shouldn't fully constrain knowledge from children because of their age, but I do understand as to why we do this. I hope that these examples all showed you guys that there are many constraints of our pursuit of knowledge, as we all try to pursue knowledge in one way, shape, or form, but there's just many things. I think sometimes things are pretty obvious in which we should have constrained them or not, but I think a lot of them are up to debate. I think the greatest example being the Sanford experiment, as again, it's a very tough decision to choose between the lives of humans and the pursuit of our knowledge. But I hope these examples really put into question this idea, and I thank you all of you for watching. Goodbye.